Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I've got Tom with me today, and we're going to be talking about generative AI. But before I get into all the questions that I've got for you, Tom, can you give everybody a real quick introduction?
Yeah, sure, Emma, and thanks for having me on, and hopefully everyone's doing great out there. In terms of my background, more of an entrepreneurial background, but it was more back in the 1990s with the internet. Started different companies in that area. So I have a technical background, but I also have a writing background. I've written for publications like Forbes and so on, and I've written different books on technology. 5 years ago, I wrote a book on artificial intelligence called AI Basics. And the irony there is it's selling, more books today than it was when it came out back then. And then my most recent book is on generative AI. Just came out about a month ago. That's an area I've been focused on for the last few years. And as we all know, it's been at a pretty crazy lately.
Yeah, which is exactly why we're having this conversation. And so going back maybe even a little bit to that first book, and now certainly the one that you just mentioned on generative AI, I want to start with just like a level setting question. And can you, from your perspective, share with us what generative AI is and maybe some of the components from a technology perspective that make it work?
Yeah, sure. And, I can understand why it can be confusing. The media, there's so much, so many articles and videos being done on this. So there's a lot going on. And it seems like it's constantly changing. But generative AI is really just, the name really tells what it does. And it takes in data, uses these complex models, and generates content. And we've seen, a lot of us have seen this through ChatGPT, where it creates text content. So you ask it a question or you engage in a chat with it, and it seems like it's like a human, in terms of the content creation. But there's also these models are becoming multimodal, so they will also be able to interpret images and create images. There's a product, a new system called Claude that and Bard and all these other systems that are taking this on the image side. So you could do something like give it a PDF and it'll OCR the PDF and then interpret the PDF, and you can ask questions to the PDF. Or you have a 10K for Apple, and you can, it'll go through that PDF, and then you can learn about Apple Computer and about its prospects. So the image part of it is, I think, really exciting, but it's still in the early stages. Right now it's more about text. And a lot of this technology is new. This is on the language side. In 2017, Google researchers published a paper called "Attention is All You Need." It came up with what is known as the transformer model, and that's the basis of ChatGPT and these other models, generative AI models, especially for text. And what it does is it trains on huge amounts of information, perhaps all the information that's available on the internet, and then applies these very complex probability and sampling algorithms to find the relationships between all the different words that have been trained on. And then, it doesn't really know anything, because, for example, if you start doing some complex math, a lot of times it'll give you the wrong answer because it doesn't have a calculator. It's just looking at relationships between words. Now, if you do 1 + 1, it will say 2, but if a more complex one, it won't say the right answer. And then there's other models called diffusion models, and those are for images. And we've seen that with Stable Diffusion and Midjourney. And it's a similar type of system where it's using probability and sampling, but it's different technology. But it will take lots of images, and then from that, create new and unique images. So, you don't have to be an artist anymore, or a graphic, photographer or whatever, or professional photographer. You could feed it, just tell it what image you want, and presto, there's 4 images right there. And then you can say, I like that one. Let's focus on that one, but let's change this. And so in a very short period of time, you can create some compelling images. So kind of in a nutshell is generative AI. It's about text generation, image generation, and eventually we're going to probably get to video in the next few years.
So where I kind of want to segue this into what we're seeing in the enterprise space when it comes to generative AI then. And, I've seen some statistics about how ChatGPT, when it came onto the market, reached new heights quicker than Netflix and all of these other technology revolutions that we've seen over the course of the last couple of years. And that's not unique just to kind of consumer-based interaction with these types of models. Can you share a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of adoption, or at least thinking through utilizing generative AI in an enterprise setting?
Mhm. Well, when it comes to adoption, the chances are your people are probably already using it. You probably already know it, but they're using it already. They're using it to summarize documents. They're using it to write emails. I mean, I was talking to a company the other day, and he's talking about one of his salespersons that was using ChatGPT to with his prospects, and actually had better efficiency, better performance. The fact is, writing these emails can get tedious, and just don't have the time to do all that. So it's a force multiplier. It's a way to increase efficiency. And I know some companies have tried to ban it, but I think ultimately that just doesn't work because your employees are going to find a way to use this technology. So I think when it comes to this, is to recognize that this, you can't deny the technology. The genie's out of the bottle. But for enterprises, I think the first step is to evaluate this technology, provide some education to your employees to better understand it and how to use it, and implement some of the safeguards, because this technology can go off the rails and cause problems for your company. So these early concerns are definitely legitimate. I just think banning of it was not the right approach, but there's other ways to address the problems.
So, when we take a look at companies trying to figure out how to bring it into their organization, rather than just kind of these one off individuals using large language models or really anything from the generative AI perspective, there isn't a lot of benchmarks or guidance for companies on how to do that. So, from your perspective, what would be your advice on considerations or maybe some use cases that companies should be considering?
Mhm. Yeah, I think talking about benchmarks is important. Seems like every day there's a new large language model coming onto the market. We saw Llama 2 last week come out. There's Palm 2. There's Anthropic. And because these models are so big, and a lot of times they're proprietary, the companies that create them don't provide a lot of metrics and information about it. It's hard to evaluate one model to the next model. Now, when I look at them, well, you could kind of tell some differences, and some tend to be better at doing one thing versus the other, and some are trained for certain use cases. So Google's Palm 2, they have different models for security and scientific papers and medicine, for example. I think the first step for evaluating this in the enterprise is to one is to try to figure out what model makes the most sense for your company. Obviously, if you're a healthcare company, that Google's Palm 2 might be a way, the first place to look at. Or if you're looking at as a way to look at security, which I think is a huge opportunity, a great use case for generative AI. Microsoft has a solution, and of course, Palm. So, the first thing is just look at these different models and see, even though the benchmarks are not perfect, but at least see kind of where they've been trained on and where their focus is. And it also is important if these are companies with a lot of resources, there's a lot of open source models emerging. But, do you, how comfortable can you be with maybe a startup creating these large language models? Are they trained with safe AI? What about security? Could these models have been poisoned by hackers, for example? So I would stick with the larger models, look at those that address kind of your use cases. And I think the temptation is to go all in and go crazy and have something that scales across the organization. But I think the better approach is to start in one area. Marketing has already been an area that's seen a lot of traction because you want it to be creative. if it makes mistakes, that's fine. So that's been a great place to start, is in something like that. Or sales is another example. Again, my friend at this company and the salesperson using this technology got a lot of gains out of it. Wasn't perfect, but it actually, was a big boost. So I think, look at these models, which one fits, but also look at a category where there's more low-hanging fruit and more opportunities to get some quick wins versus trying to do a massive deployment across the organization.
Thank you so much for the input. And for anybody watching, make sure that you follow Tom if you're not already. Check out the books that we mentioned earlier on if you're newer to AI or if you're ready to take that venture into diving into generative AI. But Tom, thank you very much for joining me, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Leading Change. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back weekly for more expert interviews on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.